Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 18 in the discourse Vaydaber Moshe El Roshei Hamatos, which is the 10th discourse in the overall book, B'Shashe Hegdimu. And we are now in the third class in chapter 40. And in last class, we were explaining how the second form of Ilav Alul, cause and effect, or a cause and effect in which the cause and effect are so close to each other, in which the cause descends into the effect and the effect grasps the cause, and they're each able to get closer to each other. And specifically, the chiddush is that the effect is able to climb and open itself up more and more and draw itself nearer to the cause. This entire dynamic is only possible, we learned, in chitzonius, in the external, not in essence. So the second example that he was talking about was the intellect of a student versus the intellect of the teacher, and in which the olul, the effect, is a ray. It's not a new entity. It's not something that was hidden there all along and just exposed, but rather it's a continuation of the cause, and that's why, in a sense, it's a little bit of a more closer ilava alul than when it's two separate entities and one is only producing the other, like we discussed, intellect and emotions. But yet, even in this case, we were explaining, and this is what the mimer was explaining, the discourse was explaining, how the very fact that the relationship between these two are one of closeness and openness and accessibility, where one accesses the other, is a sign that even the source, even the cause, even the higher level, is not essence, because in essence there's no grasp. And the very fact that what is produced can grasp its producer is a sign that that's already the external element of the essence of the source, because the external element of the essence is graspable. But the real essence, like we discussed last class, that the relationship between light and luminary is one that the light, although it reflects the luminary and it's attached to the luminary, it never grasps the luminary. And there is always a schism. There's always some kind of a separation where the light is always endlessly inferior to the luminary, and it can't do anything to help it. And that's even on the higher form of luminary and light, where the luminary is not hiding itself from the light that it is projecting. There's a lower form of light and luminary, which we discussed, where the luminary on purpose conceals itself and then shines a kind of a disconnected. It's connected, but it's not. It's trying to the luminary is not expressing itself in this light. So there is a contraction, but and even then there is a great. I'm sorry. So then, for sure, there is a great separation between the luminary and the light. But even in a case where the luminary is expressing itself, the very fact that it's light and not luminary, so there is over here a separation, an unbridgeable kind of separation, which we do not find in the system of ilav alul, of cause and effect, and in the type of cause and effect that we're talking about over here. They get close to each other. They're, as we discussed, both in intellect and emotions, that the intellect actually reaches all the way down into the emotions. Today I was learning a discourse from the Alter Rabbi where it explains a Kabbalistic concept that Yesod Ema, the Yesod element of Bina, which is the intellect, and the Yesod is its ability to bond and to connect to the next level, descends from the Bina, which is in the Mochen, in the head, and goes all the way down to the Chazad Dezah, to the chest of the Zeir Anpin, which means the same concept that we discussed earlier, Bina Liba, that Bina goes all the way into the heart. It extends downward, which means that the cause, which is the bina, extends itself into the effect, into the ila, into the alul, which would in this case would be the emotions, the heart. And then we're also learning that the emotions can climb up and get closer to the intellect, as we discussed in last class, that there's something called refined emotions, where the emotions elevate themselves. They elevate themselves out of their nature of emotions, which are very self-absorbed, and become more elevated towards the intelligence. So the fact that there is this closeness and interaction between the two is very much an indication of how even the source allows itself to be taken, and that's a sign that it's not the essence, because the essence is elusive. Okay, that was what we learned earlier. Now we're holding at the last third of the first chapter of Perek Mem. Then we're going to which is the main part of the Maimer, and then he's going to connect it to the parsha that, like he does in every discourse, where he connects it to the Torah portion. And the example of this will be understood above. The Yishtal is ilava alol, that the whole not because earlier he explained this how it is in the human experience. Now he's applying it to the godly experience. That the evolution, the chain-like evolution of cause and effect, shayach is only shayach rak ba'orein sof, only in which level of orein sof, in orein sof, but in orein sof, shenoida mitziyasai, in which its existence is being known, v'loy mohusai, but not its essence. In other words, what is he saying? Where the essence of the orein sof is present, there is no hishtalshalos, there's no ila v'yolol. There's no, that whole idea of evolution from that dimension. Nothing evolves in the manner, it can be influenced from there, but not in the manner of ilo v'olol. In the manner of ilo v'olol, in as much as the Orein Sof is concerned, it's only where there is an experience of the Metzios of the Orein Sof, of the existence of the Orein Sof, which means about the description of the Orein Sof, if it's possible to describe Orein Sof. In other words, knowing its existence, but not knowing its substance. Translate that into, as the Orein Sof reveals itself in Bina, which Bina is an experience of description, of Metzios, it's external. The whole Bina experience is in the externality of something. Over there can be a continuation of levels that emerge where they're interlooped. One level is interlooped with the level before it. From the understanding of the Orein Sof in Bina can come the excitement of the Orein Sof in the heart, in the emotions, which happens in the Midos, in the Ze'er Anpin above. They're experiencing the Orein Sof, but the source of the experience of the Orein Sof in the Midos above, in the supernal Midos, is the Bina. And the Bina is informing the Ze'er Anpin in a very interactive way. And that's because even Bina itself is only hanging out on the outside of the Orein Sof. It's understanding whatever you can appreciate about Orein Sof in terms of a description, but not the substance. In Chachma, however, which is the first sphera of the 10 spheres, over there, Chachma is open and receiving the Orein Sof in a manner where Chachma is taking in the substance of the Orein Sof. And that's why Chachma, if Chachma is going to influence further than Chachma, it's not going to be in a manner of Ila ve'olol, because that's already the essence of the Orein Sof. And if the essence of Orein Sof, the essence of something, does not lend itself to an Ila ve'olol chain-like evolution and progression. Okay. The Bechinas HaMetzias the Orein Sof, because, so he says, the whole Ila ve'olol is only Shayach, Rak ba'Orein Sof, only in the level of Orein Sof, Shanoida Mitziyasa, in which its existence is known, but not its substance. The Bebchinas HaMatzias to Oirin Soif, because in the existence of Oirin Soif Baruch Hu Shayach HaSaga, it's possible to speak of some kind of a grasp. Like Bina grasps in the Oirin Sof. What's Bina grasping? The Oirin Sof that's flowing to it. But obviously, because it's grasping, it means it's the external of it. Because in the essence of Oirin Sof, Leis Machshava Tfisa, there's no thought that can grasp it. And since there's already since over there there is a grasp, so over there it's possible to have an evolution. Sha'olol, that the effects masig grasps as a its cause of an imtza be'erach ela, and it's to be found somewhat in the same ballpark as the ela, as its cause. And it can, as we said before, it can get closer. The emotions, there are elevations in the emotions of the Ze'er Anpin where they get much closer to Bina. And Bina lowers herself down into the Ze'er Anpin. Because the entire experience over here is only the Metzias of the Orin Sof. But in the essence, that's not grasped. The whole Ila v'olol experience, the whole Ila v'olol dynamic doesn't exist. And with this is where he's concluding what he mentioned all the way in the beginning of this mimer. No, not in the beginning of the mimer. In the beginning of chapter 39, the previous chapter, he says, and this is why we say that the Mochen of Chachma is above the whole system of evolution. That would mean like this, that when we say, for example, on Yom Tif, on holidays, there is an extra illumination, Bina. Bina opens wide and shines enormous light into the entire cosmic order. That kind of revelation that happens on Yom Tif, since it's explained in Kabbalah, that's Mochen the Ema, it's the Mochen coming from Bina. There's an expansion of Bina energy in the entire world. That revelation is called a revelation with an or of that is part of Seder Ishtalshalos. It's a light that is part of the evolution. It's just an increased light. And obviously, when the light of Bina increases, it causes an elevation and a chain-like progression of elevation all the way throughout the entire system, all the way down to the physical world, that we can grasp and experience and be elevated ourselves in our divine consciousness. And then it says, but contrast that with Shabbos. Shabbos is a revelation of, there's an expansion and an openness in Mochen Da'aba. The Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos is the revelation of Chachma. And what happens then? Obviously, it also increases, and that's called a Giloy L'mayla Meseder Ishtalshalos. It's a revelation from above the entire order of evolution. How is that different than the Yom Tov experience? It doesn't come in a manner in which it creates a continuous expansion in each level, and each level becomes more open to grasping what is higher than it. It doesn't do that. What it does is it stuns and it shocks the entire system, and it brings everything into a state of total bittul. What happens when this reveals itself is that everything becomes nullified in front of this light. And that's the difference. When Bina reveals itself to the creation and throughout, when Bina energy expands into the cosmic order, it brings joy. It creates expansion and openness and an increased experience throughout all of the Seder Ishtalshalos, an experience of delighting in the divine, having joy in godliness. When Shabbos energy enters the world, it causes a suspension of everything. Everything is silenced because the king walked in. In other words, it's higher than grasping and higher than understanding, because the Giloy of Mochen Da'aba is completely above Ishtalshalos, and it's above grasp. The Inyan, and now he explains a little stronger the difference between the Inyan, the Chachma and Bina. The difference between Chachma and Bina is going to elaborate on the idea of Chachma being the recipient of the essence of the Orin Sof, and Bina being the recipient only of the existence, the outer aspects of the Ein Sof, because it's explained in many places that it is known that Chachma and Bina and Riyah v'Shmiya is sight and sound and hearing. So what's the difference between seeing and hearing? When you see something, you see it. You might not be able to describe it. You might have no understanding of what you just saw. But when you see something, you've seen its very substance of what it is. When you hear about something, you're hearing descriptions. That's external. There's a difference between seeing and hearing. And Riyah v'Shmiya, the Ein Adayim Shmiya Riyah, and we know you cannot compare Shmiya, hearing to seeing. When you see something, the impact that it has on you, on the person, on the seer, on the one who cited this, is incomparably deeper and more profound than when you're hearing something. Because your connection, you're taking in of whatever it is that you're, let's say, if God, by the giving of the Torah, if all the Jewish people would have had just a sound experience, but without any vision, then the impact that the giving of the Torah has on the Jewish people would be of a much, much, much weaker impression. It would be powerful and mighty, but far less impressive. The fact that there was not only a sight, they cited the sounds, which means that they saw the substance, not of God, but the substance of the commandments, and that therefore carved itself out into our collective consciousness and in our individual consciousness, because every single person was there on levels that are super, super powerful. And that's the idea, and that's in anything. The hafish b'neiim yedua, and the difference between them is known. The shmiyahu merachik, the hearing something is from a distance. It is the two entities that are interacting with each other. The one that is hearing and the thing that is being heard are at a distance from each other. And what that means is hasagas metzias davar. The hearer is grasping through the hearing. They're grasping only the existence of the entity. Veriya, but citing something is seeing it. Mikarov is from closeness. Shuriyas etzem adavar. You see the essence of what it is. And in the intellectual, in the mind experience, there are the two powers of Chachma and Bina. Chachma gets to, now, even though we're dealing with the mind conceiving an idea, the mind experiencing having a light, a flash. But we call it, when Chachma happens, we call it a light. A light is not something you hear. A light is something you see. So even though you're not seeing it with your physical eyes, but you're seeing it with your mind's eye. You're getting to a flash of a certain reality. This is, and therefore, once Chachma is the Chachma experience in whatever entity, and especially when it comes to the Chachma of the Neshama, that is getting to, that is having a Chachma moment with God, an illumination of Chachma, it's a certain coming close to Hashem, where Hashem is revealing Himself to your Neshama. And that what that does is shu is amtos. It is it becomes so real. This amtos means that it becomes real to you. Hadavar, the matter becomes enrealed, if you might say. Its reality becomes your reality. But loy mitzad hasaga, not from grasping it. You might not have any grasp at all in what you know is just absolutely true, because you've seen it. That's what he says, within the eye of the mind. You see the truth of the matter. As it is. And as explained elsewhere. The vision of Chachma, is when you're seeing the essence, and that's why we were learning earlier. Remember, we were learning earlier that there is a certain depth of Chachma that never ever translates into the Bina. The Bina does not get We had chapters earlier, we were learning about this. Why? Because the pnimius of that chachma, the essence of the experience, even though later you do pass it on to the analytical side of your mind and crunch it and digest it and develop it and seek to grasp it. So we were learning earlier that the sharpness of it, that you had the moment that you had that epiphany and that lights turned on, you do not get that clarity in the same way even when you're understanding it as you sunk your teeth into it and completely and chewed on it and digested it. So on the one hand, it's settled much more inside of you, but what you've taken of whatever it is that you've perceived is more the externality of it, its descriptions, its explanations. But the essence of it is an experience. And that experience is the experience of Chachma. Because Chachma sees what Bina can never process. Obviously, when we're dealing with the divine, this becomes so much more important, right? This is the essence of Chachma. And this is what we say when we say the essence of Chachma. We mean the essence that's revealed in Chachma. And that's the reason why Chachma is in a total other experience. And again, this concludes sort of the idea that we were saying earlier, that and again, we'll understand we're not leaving it over here, because the entire next mimer is going to continue exploring this phenomenon, the idea of how Chachma is different than Bina. So even if it's not yet fully integrated, that's all it's Chachma. It's one should be ready for more information on this. But this at least concludes the idea that we said earlier, that Chachma is considered Elyon, higher, essentially, because it's a complete different experience. It's not more just a brighter light. It's fundamentally a different experience than Bina. Chachma, now he says in the parentheses, Yesh Gamkein Esespheres. Now, one of the questions we have over here is that, don't we have within Chachma 10 spheres? So if we say that Chachma is above Ishtalshalos, above the entire evolution of because Chachma is essence, so how do we have Ishtalshalos in Chachma? How do you get to the Bina of Chachma, and how do you have other spheres of Chachma? Now, he's not directly asking that question. He's just examining, when we say that Chachma is the taking in, the vision and the seeing of the essence, he's going to say that is the deeper side of Chachma. There is more properties to Chachma. There is a certain extension of Chachma where Chachma extends lower than that vision. And even though it's not the vision of Chachma, and it's a lower form of we're going to see soon, the emotions of Chachma, which is already not the vision of Chachma, but yet, as he's going to explain, it still retains, since it's Chachma, it has to retain this thing that it's experiencing the essence of whatever is taking place in that Chachma. If it belongs to the sphere of Chachma, to the sphere of Chachma, if it belongs to that realm, it has to be in the inside of the experience, not in the external of the experience. It might not be vision, it might be some reaction to the vision, but it's still under the influence of that vision and of that essence. And let's see what he says. In Chachma, there's also 10 spheres. The first three, which means the Chabad of Chachma, who are Riya Be'etzem Adavar. That's the vision of it. Now it needs to be understood, what's the Bina in this? If it's all vision, then so you have to say it's the hearing within the vision. It's within the Riya, within the seeing of it, which is the dominant factor over here. The Chachma of it is the seeing of the seeing, and the Bina of it is the hearing within the seeing. What that means, I don't know. But all three Chabad elements of the Chachma, we can check off the vision box, because they're all still one, they're all unified in the experience of the vision. And that's the reason why, on that level, the vision of something, you're so inside of what, you're so lost in what you're seeing, it's not, there isn't any possibility of emotions yet. It's still above emotions. It's above emotions. However, there is a full configuration of Chachma. So there is emotions to Chachma as well. Even we're not talking about midos in the heart that are influenced by Chachma. We're talking about within the Chachma itself. Since Chachma has shleimus, since every sphere of holiness contains within it all the 10 spheres, so there has to be midos in Chachma. He says, Gama midos shemechachma hem gam kein bebchenas amtos, is also dominated by the idea of it having a certain absoluteness, a certain truth that's beyond the truth of my math and my calculations. It's like when you come to a convincing conclusion based on grasping, on calculations, there is always a tiny little bit of doubt, maybe I'm wrong. There is always that possibility, because you can always be one digit off in your mind. So Bina does not have his amtus. It doesn't have the absoluteness like when you saw something, like you say, no, like someone can come and tell you from today till tomorrow, whatever it is, but you say, I saw it with my own eyes. With all the questions, even if someone is going to try to bring all kinds of rational scientific proof that it was impossible that you saw that. But if you know that you saw it, and it really was not an imagination, it was not an hallucination, it was something that you really saw, then no one in the world can shake it, even though everybody will think you're crazy, but it doesn't make a difference. You saw it. So Chachma has this amtos. So he's saying like this, the emotions that are within the Chachma have that certainty, have that absoluteness, that the amtos, the emes of it is shining in that in those emotions of the Chachma, which the Bina will never give them. It's beyond grasping. Like stated elsewhere, so this idea can be seen where the Gemara tells us that Rav and another Amora, another one of the, Rav is one of the great Talmudic scholars, and maybe it was Shmuel, who he usually argues with, I'm not sure. Rav had he was asked a certain halachic, a certain query, a certain question regarding a certain law was presented in the Beis Medrash. Rav, contemplated and thought about it and came up with his verdict. And Rav said it's forbidden. I don't know what the question exactly was. And Rav came and prohibited such and such. Then one of the students, or one of the rabbis over there, challenged Rav with a real challenge, and it was and basically challenged his ruling. And when Rav heard the challenge, Rav was silent. That means the challenger challenged him with a convincing argument. And usually, when you find in the Gemara all the time that when a rabbi makes a ruling, and then there is a challenge brought up, and the challenge is a cannot be answered, cannot be responded to, because then obviously the understanding was incorrect. The original conclusion was incorrect, and the rabbi admits, I was wrong, and changes his ruling. If in this case, the reasoning that his ruling that based on his understanding of the subject matter brought him to say that it's forbidden, it's not kosher. If you ask me a question that refuted that, okay, now you have to return it back to kosher. Yet Rav maintained his insisted on his original ruling, even though he had no explanation to answer the valid question that the person was asking. So the question is, we cannot say that Rav, who's a He was just being a stubborn person, God forbid, and acting because, God forbid, anything else, that anything else mattered other than the truth, but the truth. And Rav insisted, and this was his psak halacha, which means that he instructed his community to behave, to follow a certain ruling in Torah, which is, and on what? On something that he was refuted by. And yet he insisted this way. So Chassidus says, doesn't make any sense. How is that? And the answer is, in the world of logic, he was challenged. But when Rav came to his conclusion that this thing is prohibited, he experienced that truth of Torah with such a clear certainty of Chachma. His Chachma saw this truth, whatever it is. And even though someone challenged him in the realm of understanding, it's like we say, a person says, I saw it, I might not understand how I saw this or what this, or I can't explain what I saw, but this is what I saw. Right? And another person said, well, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense, but I've seen it. So Rav had that conviction. So what does it have to do with emotions? Because when Rav had the perception of whatever it is in Torah, a certain truth about God's will, whatever it is that he was perceiving, the Chabad of the Chachma, we said it was a Chachma experience, but the Chabad of the Chachma doesn't decide prohibited or not prohibited. The Chabad is just what it is. The leaning afterwards to say it's prohibited, and therefore it's prohibited, or therefore it's permitted, that's already belongs to the range of emotion. Of is it good, and therefore we can draw this in. If it's prohibited, means it's a rejection. That's already a consequence of the Chachma. But again, this is not taking place in the heart. It's not that Rav is experiencing emotions towards it, but it's a leaning in the head, in the mind, to chesed or to gevura. In this case, to gevura, because gevura means to judgment, and he's saying it's prohibited. So this is a gevura in the chachma still. It's not in the bina, because he didn't have the logic to the understanding and the backup to explain why this emotion of rejection of this thing, of this judgment emotion is there. He didn't have that explanation. But he was certain that this is the way it is. And the certainty did not just remain in the abstract of the essence of the idea. The certainty was felt all the way down into what we might say, the emotional reaction of the mind. That the emotion did not budge from that truth that was informing it, which was what was informing it? It was being informed by the Riyah, by Rav's vision of the Chachma. It says, being Yishasik Rav, the Makom Lo Hader Bei. He didn't pull back. And the reason is, Shehis Ames Etzlai, it became emes by him, Shehu Aser, that it's forbidden. Rak Shaloi Haya Lo Tam Musag Al Zeh. He didn't have an explainable reason. This is the midos in Chachma. Which are they have the quality, even though they're not the Chachma of the Chachma, or not even the Chabad of the Chachma, in where the vision is taking place. It's like kind of, we might say, a outer circle of the Chachma, a little bit more to the outside. It's not the nucleus of the Chachma. It's a little bit of a sphere, a circle, where the Chachma is expanding a little bit outward. Yet it still maintains the essential quality of Chachma, and that is that you're experiencing the essence of something. And when you're experiencing the essence of something, you know it for what it really is, and no questions can refute it. And this is how he's showing us that the entire configuration of Chachma, and I guess even the Malchus of Chachma, which would be the speech of Chachma, when speech is receiving directly from Chachma, and is in the world of Chachma, you can see the convincing, it has a certain, these words have a certain, I mean, not saying it beferish, but I would have a certain certainty to it and an absoluteness to it that is unarguable. It's higher than grasping, chulu, as it is now. Okay. So this concludes the first part of chapter 40. The second part of chapter 40 is actually going to take us a little bit out of, it's going to bring us more into the midos of this mimer, and take us a little bit away from the haskala. And it's nice because it's going to take us a little bit into the world of avoda, into the world of practical avodas Hashem, serving God, how to serve Hashem, and so on and so forth. Because it's going to explain the concept of vows, which he opened up with, but a beautiful explanation. So I'm very much looking forward for the next probably 2 classes or maybe 3 classes, which with this we will conclude. I do want to say a mazel tov because I realized that we crossed over the 200 mark, and I think this class was the 202nd class. So when we're learning over here, 100 is a milestone. 200 is also a milestone. But since we are learning and engaging in an infinite type of a study, the number that we celebrate is not 100, but the number that we celebrate is 101. So this class that we learned right now, I think, was 202. The fact that it's 202 is, or maybe it's already 203, but we're already like, I feel like we're swimming in the infinite pool, and it's really, really amazing. Okay. Mazel tov.